All right, thank you, Matt, for those good words. As we're out here outside among God's creation, I thought it'd be a good time to remind ourselves of some very important beliefs that we have and why we believe them. And so, from time to time, we're going to talk about the subject of the origins of life. We're going to talk about how did all this that's around us come into existence? How did we come into existence? And I've entitled this lesson, What Takes More Faith? And we'll explain what that means in just a second. But I think as we look at the world we live in today, and maybe some of the trends we're seeing, I think it's very important that we as Christians know what we believe and why we believe it, and why people don't believe the same thing. And I think it's very important that our children know not only why this is the answer for how all this came about, but why that's the answer, the evidence behind that. Kids are being challenged and pressured and mocked on college campuses as they stand up for a belief in God. And our kids got to be ready for that and understand why that's going to happen, and know that there is strong evidence for believing in God. So I want to use a story from the life of Jesus that's going to be our key story for what we talk about this morning. And that is found in Matthew chapter 12. If you want to begin turning there in Matthew chapter 12. And I'm going to begin reading in Matthew 12, verse 22. Matthew 12, and in verse 22. Then a demon-possessed man who was blind and mute was brought to Jesus, and he healed them, so that the mute man spoke and saw. All the crowds were amazed, and saying, "This man cannot be the son of David, can he?" But when the Pharisees heard this, they said, "This man cast out demons only by Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons." And knowing their thoughts, Jesus said to them, "Any kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and any city or house divided against itself will not stand. If Satan cast out Satan, he's divided against him. How then will his kingdom stand? If I by Beelzebub cast out demons, by whom do your sons cast them out? For this reason they will be your judges. But if I cast out demons by the Spirit of God, then the kingdom of God has come upon you." And you might be saying, well, that has nothing to do with the origins of life and all of that. Well, this story is exactly parallel to what we want to talk about. So when we talk about the origins of life, how all this came about that is around us, the amazing thing is that man only has two answers, two possibilities. And that to me is amazing. I only know of two answers as to how all this came about. If you know of a third answer, let me know. I have not heard of a third answer. There's only two answers. Just like in Jesus casting out demons, there really was only two possibilities. He either did it by the power of Satan, or he did it by the power of God. Well, when we talk about the two answers for the origins of life, well, one is an old answer. In fact, it used to be the only answer. People had no problem believing that there was a God, a supernatural being that created this world, and that sustained them for years and years and years. thousands of years. Their children about God and how He created the world. They talked about the story in Genesis chapter 1. It's the old answer. But we are told by those that believe in the new answer that you can't talk about God and creation because that's a religious discussion. That's more of a philosophical conversation. And so we said, okay. They said we need something more concrete, something that relates to science. And we said, okay. And we pointed out that in scientific theory, a bona fide answer in science is that something didn't just come about, but it can be evidenced and concluded that it came about by intelligent design. That there was intelligence that worked to bring this about. And so we told them, okay, we'll talk about, and our conclusion will be that as you look at everything that's created around us, it came about by an intelligent designer. And scientists have made that conclusion on many, many things in existence. And most often scientists make that conclusion when they look at something and they see complexity and organization in something. And the things that they look at often are not as complex and not as well organized as the things that are all around us. But we are told by those that hold to the new answer that even the idea of an intelligent designer is not valid. It's not even worth discussion. There's just no evidence for it. And so even when we use their scientific terminology and make a bona fide conclusion in scientific terms, they say no. And so our kids go to science class in public schools and they only get one answer. We're told they can't learn about intelligent design, or it's not valid. Even though in other ways in science world, that's a conclusion they come to and it's bona fide and acceptable. Well, you'll notice in the story about Jesus, there was two answers. But the Pharisees said there's only one answer. No, he cast out demons by Satan. Well, what about the other answer, about the power of God, which Jesus gives and alludes to? And they said, no. That's not a logical answer. That doesn't work. And the reason they held to that answer, that he cast out demons by the ruler of the demons, by Satan, is the same reason why so many hold to the new answer. And that is evolution. Or better yet, what we call macro or large-scale evolution. A belief that one species, given enough time and given enough circumstances, can become another species. We're told that's the only answer. But what we find out is that new answer came about because people didn't like the old answer. So they started looking for a new answer. And thanks to Charles Darwin, they found it. And that's what they have developed into the neo-evolutionary view today that is taught. But that new answer basically has come about not because we have found some great evidence. It's come about because they didn't like the old answer. It's like the Pharisees. The Pharisees liked the other answer. And so they said, well, it's only by the power of Beelzebub, by the power of Satan. So, as we talk about the origins of life, I've basically two titles for this series. The first one I've already talked about, which takes more faith? The old answer or the new answer? The new answer tells us that that it takes no faith to believe in the new answer. It's all based on facts. It's all based on science. The new answer tells us that all we have in the old answer is faith. Why do they say that? Why do they believe that? We're going to talk about that this morning. So which takes more faith? And what I hope to show you as we go through this series of lessons from time to time is that both take faith. Let's be honest. Our position about creation or intelligent design takes faith. But it's a faith that takes a step off a mountain of evidence. But the new answer takes faith as well. And what I hope to show you is that not only does it take faith, which they deny, but it takes more faith to believe in the new answer. My second title is also a question, and that is this. Is it based on evidence or content? Is it based on evidence or content? You say, what does that question mean? What that means is the opposition by the new answer to the old answer. Is that opposition where they tell us the old answer, the answer of an intelligent designer is not valid, not even worth discussing? Is that opposition based on evidence or is it based on content? And what I hope to show you in the coming lessons is their opposition to the old answer or even the scientific answer is that it's not based on evidence, but it's based on content. In other words, they don't like the Bible that tells us the story of creation. They don't like what is the content of that book. And because they oppose that so much, they came up with a new answer. But whenever you have a issue that you have a question of, and there's two answers, and you refuse to open the door to one of those possibilities, one of those theories, or one of those possible answers, if you refuse to open that door even an inch to consider possibly that it might be this answer, then eventually you're going to back yourself into a corner and you're going to have to believe things that are illogical. You're going to have to believe things that there's absolutely no evidence for. And you believe it simply because of faith. But you also believe it because you refuse to be honest and you refuse to say that this is a possibility. And that's what's happened in our world today. Why did the Pharisees say that Jesus cast out demons by Beelzebub? Was it because of the evidence was very clear that this is all from Satan? No. Jesus goes on to tell us. It doesn't make any sense. The Pharisees have Satan casting out Satan. Satan is thwarting his own plans. His kingdom will fall, says Jesus. So that answer was not based on evidence. It was not the logical answer. In fact, it made no sense at all. Why did they say that? Well, they said that for the same reason many say the same thing when it comes to the origins of life. There's only one answer. It's not because of evidence. It's because so many champions of evolution will not open the door in which some on this day were willing to. They said, this could not be the Son of Man, can it? The Son of God? Can he? The Pharisees would not open that door. They would not take that possibility. And so when it cast out demons, they wouldn't open the door that maybe this was by the power of God. And so they backed themselves in a corner, and you'll notice there is no rebuttal to what Jesus says. They have no answer. They have no logical way of defending their position. They have to believe what they believe simply because they won't open the door to any possible other answer. And that's the world we live in. We're told these things because we're not going to open the door to an intelligent designer. Why? Because of evidence? No. Because they know if you crack that door open for an intelligent designer, then you're going to bring God into the picture, and you're going to bring the Bible into discussion, and they have no answer to that. They don't want that. And so I hope you can see, even though this is not dealing with the origins of life, that Matthew 12, 22 and following is very parallel to what we live in today. It's a perfect illustration of what's happening. So our modern culture, we live in a country that was built on the Christian faith and biblical principles. Religious freedom was a huge motivation for coming to this new world. Would you agree with that? I have a video, made a whole series of lessons on, that talks about going back into our history. And even in modern time, going back to our government buildings, like the Capitol. And as you look at that, there's all sorts of things connected to the Bible that are up on the walls, that are in the hallways. Our courtrooms used to have the 10 Commandments because there was an establishment of our law based on the 10 Commandments and that type of judicial system. But today we are told that there is no God. You can't talk about Him in school. That everything came into existence by chance and circumstance. And the whole idea is that what happens is things just mutate. And most time mutations are bad. They don't come out good. But the idea is that you give enough mutations, eventually over time you're going to have something good come out of it. And survival of the fittest, the good is going to survive, the bad is not. And so what we have is a bunch of good mutations that take a long time to come about. And all the bad mutations have not survived. It doesn't take a God to do that. But the question is there evidence for that? It's really, if you look at it, illogical. And I hope one day our world will have enough scientific evidence to where they just can't say anymore this happened just by chance and circumstance. So the question comes about, what changed? Changed from our forefathers that wanted to build a country where you could worship God and you could be a man of faith and not have to worry about people and their opposition to it. That you could have that freedom, to where now we are told you can't mention that in school. You can't mention God at work. What changed? Well, if you turn to Romans chapter 1, verse 21 and 22, Paul tells us exactly what happened. Now I know Paul is writing about the ancients here, the people of ancient times, but he's really writing about our time as well. Romans chapter 1, verse 21 and 22, for even though they knew God, they did not honor Him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. That's exactly a group in our society decided, we know God, but we don't want to honor God. And not only that, we don't want anyone else to honor God. It really went against the whole idea of why this country came about. And I want you to notice at the very end, he says, professing to be wise. Well, what are we told today? Those that believe in evolution, that believe in the new answer, they're the smart ones. They're the ones that have the knowledge. They're the experts. And everyone else that doesn't believe that becomes foolish. But God says it's actually the other way around. Paul talks about that they became futile in their speculations. And I think what you're going to see is that there's a lot of speculation, not a whole lot of facts with the new answer. Their foolish heart was darkened. And we're going to talk about that darkness in just a second. But whether we want to admit it or not, we live in a secular culture. And there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of problems that add to that. Number one, first problem. We live in a society where we think only in sound bites and extremes. I want to say that again. We think only in sound bites and extremes. Most of our social media is what? It is short, it is quick, and it is what? Meant to grab your attention. It goes to the extremes. We have what? Instagram. We have these short videos that they can only be that long. When you get onto Facebook and Twitter, especially Twitter, you have this column on the right that tells you what's trending, and it's just this little thing. And it's supposed to grab your attention. And a lot of us, that's how we get our news. That's how we find out what's going on in the world today. But a lot of it is not based on facts or truth. A lot of it is sensationalized. But what we need to is look at everything around us. Take a very hard look and a very honest study about it. And forget about all the sound bites and the short little videos. The second problem is that our society has accepted several myths while claiming that the Bible itself is a collection of myths. It's kind of an ironic twist, isn't it? That we're told the Bible is a collection of myths. But when we look at what we see in the world today about the Bible and about even the new answer, we're going to see there's a lot of myths that have to be accepted in order for the new answer to stand. The third problem is that there is an air of supremacy by those who champion evolution. In other words, if you don't agree with them, then you are labeled dumb, crazy, delusional, or even psychotic. You believe a man was raised from the dead? Give me a break. Seen that? You're delusional. You believe a man can walk on water? You're crazy. You believe all this could come about in 6 days? And there's a lot of people in our world that live like in herds, and followers. To do is say, if you do this, then you're like this. Oh, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be called that. So I'm going to go along with the flow. And so this air of supremacy has won out as intellectualism. And the Christian faith has been labeled dumb and crazy, delusional, even psychotic. In Psalm 14 verse 1 is a very telling psalm written long ago, but so truthful even about our day and time. In Psalm 14 verse 1, the psalmist writes, "The fool said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have committed abominable deeds. There is no one who does good." Now we often look at Psalm 14 and we look at that first part, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God, and boom, that's where we stop. That's a profound statement. In the eyes of God, when you say there is no God, you become foolish. Just like Paul said, professing to be wise, they became fools. But I want you to notice, those who say there is no God, there's a pattern here. There's a result. He says they are corrupt. They have committed abominable deeds. There is no one who does good. When you say there is no God, eventually what you're going to see is people that are acting evil, sinful, corrupt, committing abominable deeds, not doing good. Crime. The good people try to move away from it, but it catches up to them. We have these mass shootings, and we want to know why is this happening. And because we won't open the door to the power of God, we come to the wrong conclusion every time. It's happening because we as a society say there is no God. And there's a consequence to that belief. There's a consequence to not opening that door. So as we end our lesson this morning, I wanted to talk to you about 3 myths that we're going to talk about in the coming lessons, and to show that they are myths, there's no truth in them. But a reason why all this exists, why we're told there's only one answer today. Number one myth: science and the Bible are diametrically opposed. When you start talking about God, creation, the Bible, that science disagrees with that. They're opposed to one another. But the truth is, they complement one another. There are several times where science has complemented the Bible. There's several examples that can be shown where science has actually shown the Bible and its facts and figures to be true and accurate. But again, we're not going to open that door. If it does, we ignore those. We don't see them. We don't see any evidence that Jesus can cast out demons by the power of God. We're not going to open that door. The second myth that we're going to talk about is that faith in God is simply a blind faith. That people believe it only because they want to believe it. There's no evidence for it. It's just something that they want to believe. And that's why they're crazy and delusional. But the truth is, as we talked about earlier, both sides take faith. Both sides have evidence that they pull to. But both sides have faith. One side will admit it. The other answer will not. We are told because we have blind faith that we are not a people that investigate and look for evidence. We're told we're people that can't do that. We simply have to believe it. But here's a fact. What if I mention schools like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Dartmouth, Brown, schools that we call the Ivy Leagues? Would you say that those schools are all about investigation and learning, and about teaching their students about how to investigate, to study, and to find fact things? Would you say that some of these are the leading schools in scientific process? I think you would have to say absolutely. A scientist that has graduated with a degree from Harvard is looked at in very, very high standards. These are some of the top schools of what we might say education and scientific investigation. But do we realize that these schools were started by quote-unquote Christians who wanted to start colleges and universities to teach their children about science, about everything around us, about the things in the world, even outside of the Bible, that exist? Mathematics, English, philosophy. All these things they want to teach their kids with a view from a godly perspective, from a biblical perspective. They've always been schools of investigation. Christians have always loved to look at the evidence and to deal with it and to bring out the facts from the myths. It is a myth to say that faith in God is blind faith. And thirdly, our third myth we're going to talk about is the more you dive into science, the more secular you will become. The more scientific you are, the more you'll be turned away from God and the intelligent designer. And that's a myth. That's simply not true. In fact, Buddy Payne, many of you know him, he's been here. Buddy Payne, who graduated with a master's degree from Harvard University, around the country preaching about Christian evidences. Recently, he says that we should be even more confident and we should be more excited about the evidence we have for God, because science has made great strides in technology. We can investigate things and we can see things deeper and clearer than we've ever been able to see. We can see things that Charles Darwin could never see or investigate. We have technology to look at the origin of life from the cell. And the more that these scientists look at these things, and there are some that are honest, the more they cannot deny there is great, great complexity in these living things. And there's great organization. So much more than what they conclude in other things where they say there's intelligent designer. The evidence is overwhelming in support of an intelligent designer that brought all this about. And so we're going to be looking at some of these myths and trying to bring out the realities. And I hope that you will encourage your kids in these things. I hope you will be able to explain to your neighbors and stand, because the evidence behind us, it is not a blind faith. And why that is important is for our neighbors, for our co-workers, that we can help explain to them, for our children to know that as they look at the Word of God, not only that they can stand strong, that there is a God that created all this, a God that loves His creation, a God, as Matt talked about, that sent His only begotten Son to die on the cross, to show His great love for us, to save us from sin. But that when that Christ says to our children that you need to believe and to be baptized to be saved of your sins, I want our kids to know for certain that that's truth. That's reality. When I do that, I'm going to become a child of God, and I'm going to stand before Him blameless, sinless, not because of my deeds, but because of the grace of God and the blood of Jesus Christ. I encourage anyone listening to this, if you have come to that conviction, let us know. We want to baptize you into Christ. We want to start your life, a life of faith, but not a life of blind faith. You see, the Pharisees wouldn't open that door. So they had to believe something illogical, something that made no sense. I pray you'll open that door today and see the power of God and let His kingdom come into your heart and among you. Thank you so much. We're going to turn over to Robert, who's going to lead us in songs, and then Kyle will dismiss us with a word of prayer.